So, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, yesterday called up Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense for Russia. This call happened at the instigation of Lloyd Austin, or the request of Lloyd Austin, rather. And it was the first time that the two men had spoken since before the outbreak of the war, or the special military operation, call it whatever you want, invasion, war, special military operation. It's basically that part where the Russian army goes into Ukraine and starts shooting people. That thing. Lloyd Austin called Sergei Shoigu. And Lloyd Austin, just a week ago, a week or two ago, had said openly, he had openly admitted that the strategic objective of the United States was to weaken Russia so it could not be a threat to any of its neighbors or anybody else for that matter. That was the avowed strategic goal of the United States to weaken Russia, and that the United States would do everything in its power to do that. And now Austin is calling Shoigu. What does that tell you? Huh? You see, people need to talk about all kinds of things. And many times, opponents, people who are at loggerheads, need to talk, if only to straighten out little details and whatnot. Even in a war, the two enemy sides are going to talk all the time because there are lots of little details that it would be just more convenient and easier for all sides if they just talked them out and straightened them out, even as they continue trying to kill one another, but it's still good to communicate, right? Now, there are different kinds of communication, of course. You call up your buddy, you call up some prospective employer or some prospective employee, you call up a competitor, an adversary. There are different levels in terms of your relationship, right? But in a situation like this, in an adversarial relationship where communication has broken down and they're not talking to one another, as these two gentlemen have not been talking to one another in over 2 months, well, the one who requests the call is the weaker party. The one who's making the request to talk knows that his situation is crumbling. And that's the case with Lloyd Austin and Sergei Shoigu. See, if the Ukraine armed forces were giving a whooping to the Russian armed forces, and of course the United States and the US Department of Defense is backing Ukraine, well, if that were the case, Lloyd Austin wouldn't be calling Sergei Shoigu. He wouldn't even make the effort. It would be the reverse. Perhaps Sergei Shoigu would be calling up Lloyd Austin, and it would be Shoigu asking, demanding a ceasefire. Because that's what happened in the call. Lloyd Austin demanded a ceasefire. He made a demand for a ceasefire. The man with the weaker hand making demands. That takes some chutzpah. Oh, most certainly does. Some gumption, a lot of brass. You're on the losing side and you're calling up the other guy and I make demands. You don't make demands when you're on the losing side. Anyway, because the fact is Lloyd Austin really is on the losing side. And the war going on here, it's a tragedy as far as I'm concerned. See, there is a point where you can resist, and there is a possibility that you will win. But insofar as this war is concerned, that day, that possibility is long gone. Every day that passes, more Ukrainian soldiers die for no reason whatsoever. And they are dying at a phenomenal rate. Current estimates are between 400 and 700 men per day. That's astronomical. Between half and a full battalion per day. That's what's going on in this war. And those men are dying for nothing because the result is inevitable. The Russians are going to win. They are winning. The fact that Lloyd Austin called Sergei Shoigu pretty much underscores the point. But the problem is that the people in Washington have told Zelensky in no uncertain terms that, Mr. Zelensky, you have to tell your armed force to stand and fight and not give an inch and to die to the last Ukrainian man. And that's what's happening. That's why I consider the Zelensky regime illegitimate and frankly evil. Because a government that truly cared for its people would have sued for peace weeks ago when it became clear that this war cannot be won by the Ukrainian side. When it became clear that the Russians inevitably are going to win this. Now, if the Zelensky regime continues as it's going, this stand and fight order, where they are literally having soldiers behind the front lines with rifles pointed at the backs of their own men and shooting anyone who deserts, who raises his hands in surrender. And they are doing that now. Credible reports are emerging of this. Well, a government that actually cared for its men would have sued for peace, but this government obviously does not, and this war is going to continue. It's going to continue for a few more weeks, or perhaps a month or two even, unless there's a key moment. And that key moment is if the Ukrainian army all of a sudden just collapses. Now, you read through history, and this happens all the time, by the way. It's not unusual. It's not unusual that an army that is fighting another one, all of a sudden there is this inarticulate sense throughout the entire army that they can't win. That's why the Zelensky regime keeps pushing propaganda so relentlessly. And because they don't really care about people like myself, perhaps like you, who are outside of Ukraine or who culturally, intellectually are just outside of this war and just watching it from afar. And we see this propaganda and we're like, dude, this is propaganda, this is bullshit, these are lies, man. This is not what's going on the ground. But that propaganda is not for us. That propaganda is made for the soldiers on the ground, for them to continue fighting, and for their families in Ukraine, to give those families encouragement that yes, victory can be achieved, when of course victory cannot be achieved. And so what's happening is that this propaganda effort, these lies, are pushing people, pushing soldiers to continue to fight. They are being relentlessly ground down. And my thinking, my feeling, is that all of a sudden everybody's going to realize that there's no victory to be won here. Victory is impossible. It's unachievable. And the whole thing will collapse. And like I said, it's happened before in other armed forces. And when it happens, it's very fast. It's incredibly fast. It's shockingly fast. Where the whole army just collapses. And it's sort of like they wake up from a fever dream. The fact that Lloyd Austin made this call leads me to hope, quite frankly, that we are getting very, very close to that moment. Because the Zelensky regime is not going to sue for peace. The Zelensky regime, it actually says, oh yes, we will sue for peace, but you, Russia, have to give us a whole bunch of things that the Russians have no intention of ever giving. I mean, it includes, giving up Crimea and withdrawing from Crimea, which will never happen. I mean, it's this pie-in-the-sky craziness, okay? But of course, that's the whole point of the Zelensky regime negotiation posture. It's a posture that no side would, in its right mind, accept. They just laugh it off, as the Russians would, as the Russians have. And of course, that way, the Zelensky regime said, see, we tried, but they didn't want to negotiate, because, of course, it was unrealistic. But anyway, the point, the Zelensky regime does not want to negotiate. It's not going to allow its soldiers to, surrender, or not even pull back, not even on a tactical or strategic retreat, which might be reasonable to save lives. No. Stand and fight. That's the order. And some of them are going to get shot in the back if they take so much as a half step backwards, because it's happening. And so countless men are going to die until all of a sudden the army as a body, as a semi-conscious collective consciousness kind of thing, realizes we can't win, and it'll collapse. I'm praying that this day is soon. And I'm actually encouraged by Lloyd Austin's call, because I think it might be very, very soon that this thing just collapses. And if it collapses like that, so swiftly, so completely, then it will save so many lives. Because, like I said, you have between 400 and 700 men dying per day, in this pointless war. It's pointless because, see, the outcome is clear and it cannot be changed. And if the Ukraine armed force, which has fought bravely, no one's disputing that, but if they suddenly just, enough, just give it up, men will be saved, lives will be saved, a country that has been torn asunder, well, something might be able to be repaired. But every day that this war continues, it's more death and more destruction, pointlessly, needlessly. And understand that the people in Washington and London who are pushing the war to keep on going, they want that. They want that death. They want that destruction. And it doesn't hurt the Russians. The Russians are fighting a war where their own casualties are exceptionally low because they know how to fight a war of attrition. They know how to inflict maximum damage on their opponent and minimum damage on their own. The slow, relentless grind. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy, no big maneuvers, no big breakouts. Just every day, just grinding away. They're past masters of it. And they're winning. That's how they are winning this war. And they are going to win it. And the sooner it's over, the better for Ukraine. The better for the people of Ukraine. The people who truly hate Ukraine and the Ukrainian people are not the Russians. It's the people in Washington and London. It's people like Lloyd Austin. Those are the people who truly hate Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation. Because if they didn't hate them, if they had a little bit of humanity, let alone liked the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation, they would have long ago asked for peace on reasonable terms. The fact that they are not proves how much they hate this country.